Well, on Sunday, Pat did a really great teaching on the genealogy of Jesus Christ. And he pointed out a few things that I thought were really interesting in that genealogy. Obviously, God can count and men can't. But we figured that out. But he pointed out that there were 4 women listed in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. And all for very important reasons. And it got my mind thinking about God has a purpose for everything he says in his word. And for somebody's name to be written in the word, that's a big deal. Especially we talk about Hebrews 11, that Believer's Hall of Fame. It lists all these wonderful men and women of God. We go through the Old Testament, the New Testament, these people that we read these names and it's like, oh man, I wonder what it's going to be like when we get to heaven and I get to meet Paul or Elijah or Elisha or Moses and all these people that are named. And when I think about important women in the Bible, of course, there are a few that come to mind. Ruth is one of the first that comes to my mind. Mary. Wonderful women of God. But what I thought was interesting is when I think about powerful, believing women of God in the Bible, the one that I think of isn't named. She's just called a Shunamite woman. Her name isn't listed. So tonight, I thought it would be exciting to go through the record of the Shunamite woman in 2 Kings chapter 4. In 2 Kings chapter 4, we're going to pick it up in verse 8. And it fell on a day that Elisha passed to Shunem, where was a great woman. And she constrained him to eat bread. We all know what constrained is. It's that Eastern custom, right? She asked him to dinner, but she has to, in that time and in that custom, has to ask him 3 times. Elijah passed by. She says, Elisha, would you come to dinner? And he says, oh no, I've just had a really big lunch. I couldn't possibly eat dinner. Elisha, please, we'd love to have you over. I'd really love for you to come and eat. Oh, sorry, ma'am, I got to go see a man about a horse. I'm busy. I can't stop. Elisha, will you please come to dinner? I made spaghetti and meatballs. Well, why didn't you say so? I'll be there. So she has to ask him 3 times. She constrains him to show that, I really want you to come here, okay? So he denies 3, and then he comes to dinner. So she constrained him to eat bread. Continuing in verse 8. And so it was that as oft as he passed by, he turned in thither to eat bread. So anytime that he came through town, he would come and eat a meal with this woman, with this great woman in Shunem. Verse 9. And she said unto her husband, Behold now, I perceive that this is an holy man of God which passes by us continually. Let us make a little chamber, I pray thee, on the wall. And let us set for him there a bed and a table and a stool and a candlestick. And it shall be when he cometh to us that he shall turn in thither. So she says to her husband, I think this is a man of God that keeps coming here. Let's make a little place for him to stay. And it talks about what she wants to do for him here. Now, what's the mind picture that you have of this chamber? A little chamber on the wall. Set a bed, a table, a stool, and a candlestick, and he can stay there. The mind picture that I have is just like a little closet, like the one we have back there. And maybe there's a cot, and there's a table like this, and there's a 3-legged milkmaid stool, and there's a half-burnt candlestick sitting there. And hey, when you're passing by, at least you got a bed. What more do you want, Elisha? A little place in the wall. Well, I can tell you that it's much more than that. I'm going to read a little bit about it in Freeman's Manners and Customs of the Bible, where I'm using a handy-dandy bookmark. So Pat gave out these bookmarks at our fellowship on Sunday, and I forgot to grab mine, and I took James's. And he was looking for it all day. He didn't know that I had his bookmark. Anyway, Let's see. So, describing this chamber room that this great Shunamite woman makes for Elijah. Okay, it says, "Let us make a little chamber, I pray thee, on the wall, and let us set for him there a bed and a table and a stool and a candlestick." Describing it, it says, "The Aliyah, Aliyah, is a chamber, is an upper room of an eastern house, being sometimes built on the roof and sometimes making a second story to the porch, which has access by the stairs." In the text, it's called a chamber in the wall, probably because its window opening to the street made a break in the dead wall and was thus about the only evidence from an outside spectator of the existence of rooms in the house. Okay? So it's usually well furnished and kept as a room for the entertainment of honored guests. Thus, the Shunamite woman entertained Elisha as related in the text. Continues on here. Oh, the stool. So that's the picture that I have, is it's a little stool, a little seat for him to sit on if he wants to do some writing on this desk or whatever. But that's not it at all. Stool here seems to indicate something very rude. But in reality, the original word, kisse, Kisse, is the very word that is used in some other passages to designate a throne. Wow. The seat for a prophet was probably the very best that could be procured. Wow. It says here that this was a great woman. This was a woman of means. This wasn't some poor woman or some poor family. They were people that had some money. They had enough to make an upper room for this prophet. They had a throne. Loretta taught us years ago about making up a place for a guest, and how, at least how I grew up, if you're going to make a guest room, that's where you throw the extra pillows that feel like cardboard, the scratchy blanket, the light that barely works. You know, that's just where you put the stuff that you wouldn't use, but hey, it's a guest room, it's just extra, right? But that's not right at all. That's not right. This is a guest that's coming to your house. Their pillows should be better than the pillows you're using. The blankets are better than your blankets. Everything is better because they should feel honored and welcomed because they're a guest. So when this Shunamite woman who thinks that Elisha, she knows he's a man of God, what kind of room would she make for a man of God? Not just a closet on the wall with half a cot and a half-lit candlestick, but this was a room fit for an honored guest. So that's the little chamber that this Shunamite woman makes for Elisha. And as every time that he came through town, he would come in and see her. Come to us that he shall turn in thither. Verse 11. And it fell on a day that he came thither, and he turned into the chamber, and he lay there. And he said to Gehazi his servant, "Call this Shunamite." And when he had called her, she stood before him. And he said unto him, "Say now unto her, Behold, thou hast been careful with us with all this care. What is to be done for thee? Wouldest thou be spoken for to the king, or to the captain of the host?" And she answered, "I dwell among mine own people." So he's like, "You've done all this stuff for us. What can we do? Is there something that you want from us? You want us to put in a good word for the king?" She says, "No, I'm all right." Verse 14. And he said, "What then is to be done for her?" And Gehazi answered, "Verily, she hath no child, and her husband is old." And he said, "Call her." And when he had called her, she stood in the door, and he said, "About this season, according to the time of life, thou shalt embrace a son." And she said, "Nay, my lord, thou man of God, do not lie unto thine handmaid." She said, "My husband's old." It doesn't say that she's old, but if she's married to an old guy, I'm going to say it's probably past that time of life, right? But how many times have we read, so-and-so was barren, so-and-so was waxed old in years, and yet they were able to conceive. So Elisha tells her, this time next year, you're going to have a son. She says, "No, don't lie to me." And the woman conceived. In verse 17, he wasn't lying. And the woman conceived and bare a son at that season that Elisha had said unto her, according to the time of life. This was a big deal, especially in the East. The whole book of Ruth is based on not having a husband and not having sons. Women couldn't own land. There were a lot of things that were very difficult for women to do in the East and in that time. So to have a son was very important. So she gets this wonderful gift from God. She conceives a son. Verse 18. And when the child was grown, it fell on the day that he went out to his father to the reapers. They go out to the field. And he said unto his father, my head, my head. And he said to a lad, carry him to his mother. And when he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her knees till noon and then died. This child that was promised, that Elijah told her she would have, he goes out to the field with his father one day, says, my head, something's wrong. The father sends him back, be with his mother. He's sitting on his mother's lap, and the child dies. Verse 21. And she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, and shut the door upon him, and went out. And she called unto her husband, and said, call the doctor.
No.
We need...
No.
No. Huh. Said unto her husband, send me, I pray thee, one of the young men and one of the asses, that I may run to the man of God and come again. Now, this is another thing that tells us that this is a woman of means. Families that had money, the women didn't walk. They rode asses, and they had a servant that followed behind them, either with a whip or a rod. They would move it. Going long distances, they rode on an ass. So she calls her husband and says, get me loaded up. I need to go see the man of God. Verse 23, and he said, wherefore wilt thou go to him today? Why are you going to see the man of God today? It's neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said, it shall be well. He said, why do you, this isn't a customary day for you to go and visit the man of God. This isn't a Sabbath. This isn't a new moon. Why do you want to go to him today? And she doesn't say, because we have a big problem and I need to go talk to him. She says, it shall be well. Verse 24. Then she saddled an ass and said to her servant, drive, and go forward, slack not thy riding for me, except I bid thee. You go and you don't stop until I tell you. Verse 25. So she went and came unto the man of God to Mount Carmel. And it came to pass, when the man of God saw her afar off, that he said to Gehazi his servant, behold, yonder is that Shunamite. Run now, I pray thee, to meet her, and say to her, is it well with thee? Is it well with thy husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, it is well. She answered, it is well. It's not well. Her son is dead. But Gehazi goes out there, and granted, this is a pretty customary greeting in the East. Is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? I think of Mark Wahlberg. Hey, how you doing? How's your mother? Right? Customary thing. But interesting in this scenario where something is not well with her family. How is your husband? Is it well with the child? And she said, it is well. Verse 27. And when she came to the man of God, to the hill, she caught him by the feet. But Gehazi came near to thrust her away. And the man of God said, let her alone, for her soul is vexed within her, and the Lord hath hid it from me, and hath not told me. Then she said, did I desire a son of my Lord? Did I not say, do not deceive me? She said, I said for you to not lie to me. If you're going to give me a son, don't lie to me. Verse 29. Then Elijah said to Gehazi, gird up thy loins, take my staff in thine hand, and go thy way. If thou meet any man, salute him not. And if any salute thee, answer him not again. And lay my staff upon the face of the child. So Elisha sends Gehazi, his servant, ahead, takes his staff, You don't talk to anybody. You don't let anybody talk to you. This is what you're doing. You're going to go straight to the child. You're going to lay my staff on his fate. You don't say anything to anybody. Verse 30. And the mother of the child said, As the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. And he arose, and he followed her. And Gehazi, he passed on before them, and he laid the staff upon the face of the child. But there was neither voice nor hearing. Wherefore he went again to meet him, and told him, saying, The child is not awaked. So Gehazi does what he's told. He runs there, he lays the staff, but the child is still dead. The child has not woken up. There is no voice and there is no hearing. And so he comes back to Elisha and tells him this. Verse 32. And when Elisha was come into the house, behold, the child was dead and laid upon the bed. The child was dead. He wasn't asleep. He wasn't in a coma. He wasn't passed out. He was dead. The word said he was dead. Verse 33. And he went in therefore, and he shut the door upon them twain, and prayed unto the Lord. And he went up, and lay upon the child, and put his mouth upon his mouth, and his eyes upon his eyes, and his hands upon his hands. And he stretched himself upon the child, and the flesh of the child waxed warm. Elisha goes in there, he shuts the door, and he prays, and God gives him revelation. God tells him what to do. You know, I don't recommend in any situation somebody's sick, you just throwing yourself on top of this other person. Probably not the right thing to do. But this is the revelation that Elisha got. It was to stretch himself out upon this child. And when he did, warmth came back to this child's body. Verse 35. Then he returned and walked in the house to and fro. So he comes back down and he's pacing back and forth. And he went up and he stretched himself upon him. And the child sneezed 7 times. And the child opened his eyes. You know, we joke a lot in my house because we've been sneezing a lot lately. And it's just, achoo! You're alive. You sneezed 7 times. You're alive. You know, this child was dead. This child was dead. This child that was promised to this Shunamite woman, that God gave her, that she loved, that she cared for, was sitting on her lap and died. And this woman was not shook because she knew God had promised her this child. God had given her this child not to take away, but for her to have. We'll finish reading here. He sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. And he, Elisha, called Gehazi and said, Call this Shunamite. So he called her. And when she was come in unto him, he said, Take up thy son. Then she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself to the ground and took up her son and went out. This woman's name isn't even named. Could you imagine the trust and the confidence and the believing that it took in that situation to be holding your son and he's dead? That's the reality. That's the reality in the situation. But in that situation, she wasn't shook. She kept her eyes on God. When she went out to her husband, she didn't say for her husband to come in. She didn't tell her husband what the problem was because the husband wasn't going to help. Told him to saddle up an ass and I'm going to go to the man of God. And when she got there, Gehazi, the servant, came out. And when he asked how everything was, she didn't tell him that her son was dead because it wasn't the servant that was going to help. That's not where her believing was. She told him, it is well. It wasn't until she got to somebody that could do something about the situation that she told him what the problem was. Walking around complaining and telling everybody about all of your problems isn't going to help your problems. If you have a problem, go to somebody that can help with the problem. You know? There's a lot of people in this world that love to worry. You know, oh, I worry because I care. I don't want your worry. I don't want your negative believing. You know, those people, I don't tell them anything about my life. I don't want them worrying. I don't want it. I shut the door. We see that plenty of times with Jesus Christ. In certain situations where people had unbelief or negative believing, he kicked them out. I want people in here that are going to believe, that are going to trust in God and have that confidence to see something come to pass that God had promised. To have that believing so high, to have it so hot, to see this miracle happen, to know that you can stand on the promises. You know, God promised this Shunamite woman that child, and she knew that God wouldn't let him be taken away. You know, God didn't take the kid away. You know, we know that, right? God is light, and in him is in no darkness at all. You know, it wasn't God that killed that child. That was the adversary. That was the devil. God doesn't kill. But God blessed this woman. She did all these great things. She loved Elisha. She did all these great things to honor him as a guest and to entertain him and take care of him and show him great hospitality. It's in Matthew 17:20 where Jesus Christ says that if you have the believing of a grain of mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, be thou removed, and it will be cast into the ocean. And how many times throughout the Gospels, Jesus Christ talks about believing. Talks about believing. The grain of a mustard seed. Have you ever seen a mustard seed? It's so tiny. And if we could just have that much believing. That much believing. That believing that you're completely convinced that God is willing and able to perform what he has promised. That you are unshakable from that promise. So many instances and records, especially in the Gospels. We just talked about, somebody shared recently about Jesus Christ being asleep on the boat, and there's the great storm, right? And he's asleep. He's asleep on the pillow. But these guys that are fishermen that are used to it are in this great storm, and they are freaking out. And Jesus comes up, puts his hand, calms the storm, and says, why you have so little believing, so little faith, little believing. To renew your mind to what God's word says and not necessarily the reality of the situation that you're currently dealing with. Renew your mind to that promise that you can trust in God, that you can believe big for great miracles, for great things. Trust and confidence. The believing of this Shunamite woman is absolutely incredible to me, especially being a father and having kids. To try to put myself in that situation, it breaks your heart, you know. So I don't know. It's very difficult to even try to think like that. But she laid him on the bed. She kept calm. She wasn't shook. And she did what she knew she could do with her believing to make things right. And in the end, her child was alive because she believed God and she believed that the man of God could do something about it. So you just keep your believing that hot. Keep your believing that white hot that God is willing and able to perform everything that he has promised us in his word. Jesus Christ says we could do all the works that he did and greater works. And we just have to believe. We just have to believe that that's true and to know it and to claim it and to walk out on it and to not be shaken from it. You know, I was talking to Mackenzie just today about some things she wants to do in life. She said, do you think I can? I said, well, if you stay focused and you believe, it's possible. Absolutely doable. You just have to believe it, and then you'll see that manifest in your life. With man, these things are impossible, but with God, nothing is impossible. So you just keep that believing up. God bless you guys.